Hello again everyone, and welcome back to my workshop for another of Harry's little Jeti Clinic videos. And in this one we're going to be making a soft start system for servos. Those of you with very big aerobatic models will know what I'm talking about. When the radio is switched off, the weight of the very big ailerons and elevators makes them hang down. It's able to actually drag the servo. And when you switch the radio on, they come back to the neutral position with a real bang and stressing the linkage because the servos on those sorts of models are not just very powerful but very fast as well. Now, to overcome this, you can buy servos with a soft start function in them. And if you've already got a model that's servoed up and you don't fancy spending $1,000 changing them to those with a soft start, or the type of servos you want don't have the soft start option, can we do anything about it? Well, Rick in Texas asked me this question, and as usual, well, not as usual, but as sometimes happens, I went straight back and said, no, not a hope, because the radio doesn't know what position the servos are starting in. But my mind wouldn't give up on it, and it wasn't long before I came up with the solution. And so we can program it into the Jeti radio. Now, I've called it a pseudo soft start because, of course, the radio does not know what position the servo's in, but we can take a pretty good guess at it because we know roughly where they're going to be when they hang down. So it's not true soft start because the servo will still jump a little bit, as they often do when they're powered up before they get signal, such as would happen with something like a central box or something that takes a while to actually boot up its processor. And you may not have predicted the positions precisely, they may have moved a little bit, but at least what they will do is twitch rather than jump full travel at massive speed. And then they'll come softly into place. So let's have a look at the thing actually in action, and I'll show you how to program it. So our transmitter is switched on. We come over here. Here's a couple of servos plugged into the aileron and elevator channels, and I'll switch the radio on. There will be a little twitch because I haven't moved them exactly to where we've predicted, but imagine they are pulled off center by the weight of the elevator and the aileron pulling them down. I'll switch the radio on and they'll come gently back to the neutral position. There we are. And now if I move the sticks, they're under full control. Okay, how do we get that to work? Right, well, the eagle-eyed amongst you might have spotted straight away that the flight mode has changed. It did start out as soft start flight mode, but it's now in default flight mode, and that's the clue to how we do this. The basic concept of this program is that the radio will start off in a flight mode where the transmitter is sending a signal to the servos that matches the position they're in when they're hanging down. And when you switch the receiver on, that triggers the transmitter to change from that starting flight mode back to the normal flight modes. And of course we can use the slowing of a flight mode change to give us that soft movement of the servos. Sneaky, huh? As I said, it's pseudo because we're having to take a guess at where the position of the servos is, and it won't be exact for every time, but a little twitch is better than the huge slam. And of course, the other problem, as I mentioned, is with digital servos, if there's a delay between them getting power and getting the signal from the transmitter through something like a central box, they are going to swing off position, but that's a problem you would have anyway, whether you use this soft start option or not. The only way around that really would be to buy soft start servos. And so having tried to get the servos off center, you hope they don't drive a little bit too far past their end travel. Let's take a look. Pop into menu, fine tuning, flight modes, and right at the bottom I've created the soft start mode. What I did was add a mode which came in, of course, up here as number 1, And what I did then was use the tools button here to set it as the default flight mode, so that it drops down to the bottom. And the mode called default isn't actually the default, it's just our normal flight mode. And if you need any other flight modes, just add them up above there as usual. So soft start would be the flight mode the system goes to unless any other flight mode is switched on. Okay, so of course we want to make sure you can't switch off all your other flight modes, but we'll look at how that's done. Otherwise it'll pop into the soft start mode and you really are up the creek without a paddle. Notice then that the delay is in going to the default mode. So that's the 1 second it takes for the servos to move to position away from the soft start mode. When you switch the transmitter on, unless any switches are in position for the other flight modes, it will start in the soft start flight mode. Okay, and as you can see, the next flight mode up, the one that we'll normally run to, is being switched by a logical switch. Okay, what is that logical switch? Let's come to advanced properties. First of all, we go to telemetry controls, because this is how we know that we've switched the receiver on. So I've made a telemetry control, called it soft, enabled it, chosen the sensor is the Q value from receiver 1. You could use things like voltages if you like, I guess. Leave it at the default type of control as a switch. And I've said when condition X is greater than 0, in other words, if Q is anywhere from 1 to 100%, it will switch on. If Q goes to 0, it will switch off. Don't worry about that yet, should you have a loss of signal in the air. We'll deal with that in a moment. The important thing is that if Q is not some positive number, in other words, basically it's 0, this will remain switched off. Why will it remain switched off? Very importantly, the default minus 100%, which in Jeti language is the off condition. It's very important you put that in, because that's what it will go to if it cannot see a signal from the receiver. And of course, when you initially switch the transmitter on, it sees no signal from the receiver, so you need it to remain at the off state. And that's what that will force it to do. As soon as it sees a condition of a Q value greater than 0, that will take over and our telemetry control will switch on. Now you might think, aha, we just use that telemetry control as the control for the flight mode. No. And the reason being, should you have a loss of signal at the receiver in the air, just for a moment, it's got completely corrupted by swamping on the 2.4 gig band or blocking due to carbon fiber or whatever, and your Q drops to 0, this is going to switch off. That will switch off your default flight mode, and therefore it'll all drop back down to your soft start flight mode. The receiver would have gone into fail-safe, which is good, but when it comes out of fail-safe, this will come back on again and push everything momentarily down and back, right faff. So how do we latch it once that's going? We go to logical switches, and control 1 is that telemetry control we've just made. There's no control in control 2 because we're going to use the A on, B off switch. In other words, when you switch the receiver on, that telemetry control switches on. And A's gone on, A on, the output goes on. Nothing can switch it off. So it will now remain latched on once you've switched the receiver on. So you can switch the receiver off and on all you like, or the radio can lose connection to the receiver and then come back again. This will just remain switched on. It won't go through the soft start routine again. Okay, and then that logical switch, as you've seen, is the one we use in the flight mode to kick it away from soft start into the default mode. Okay, right, then you have to predict where the surfaces are going to be during soft start, so that it initially kicks off with sending a signal at that point. And you just have to do this by trial and error. You can look at the servo monitor and push in full down elevator and see what percentage value your elevators are hanging down at sort of full travel. That would be a good one to start with. Bear in mind with your ailerons, you'd have to read each side independently. So push right stick, look at where the left aileron has gone to. Push left stick, look at where the right aileron has gone to, and typically use those values. Where do we put them in? This is where life gets a little bit interesting. The obvious place you think, oh, let's bung them into flight mode specific digital trim. But digital trim maxes at 125%, which is, being a trim, it's only half value, so that's 62% travel is all you would get for the servos. So if they'd fallen down to like 100% travel, they're going to do a massive jump straight away. The place we can really get things done is in the butterfly flaps. And so we change it to mode specific, and this is where I'm going to have to switch everything off to show you the flight mode. So I'll switch off the receiver. It'll tell me in a moment it's lost.
Telemetry lost. Telemetry lost.
Clear that out. Good. In fact, I will have to switch off the transmitter as well to force it back into the soft start mode. This can sometimes be easier if you just use a physical switch initially rather than logical switches to get it set up, and then change it over to the logical switch. So you can see we've started in soft start mode. If we go to our fine tuning, butterfly flaps, in the soft start mode, set the control to log max. You get there by going into logical switches, down to the very last one, log max. Okay. And that means it's going to switch on whatever was set here during the soft start mode. So we can then come down and set your ailerons to whatever value they need to go to, or the transmitter would be sending them to match where they're hanging down at. Righto? And we'll do much the same thing in the butterfly flaps menu for the elevator. Go into there. We change the curve type to constant. Run the curve way up here or down to the bottom, doesn't matter. And then set your servo values here. So run your curve to the plus 100 or minus 100%. It's not going to matter too much because you can reverse it in here. And then set your individual servo values there to match the amount of travel that they need. So what you're trying to do is get the transmitter in soft start mode to be sending out a signal to the servos that actually matches where the servos are being pulled down to by the control surfaces. And that basically is it. As I said initially, if you want to, in the flight modes, you might find it easier just to set a physical 2-position switch here, say switch C or whatever, because that can make it easier setting up the butterfly flaps menu, etc., because you can easily toggle between modes to get things right, and then come back and just swap it over to logic 1 then. Okay, so let's have a look at what happens when we actually start up. So the receiver is switched off. I'll just force a reboot here just to prove it. Okay, and the transmitter starts in soft start mode, flight mode. I'm going to switch the receiver on, and as soon as the transmitter realizes it's getting data back from the receiver, that telemetry switch will switch on. It will immediately switch on the logical switch, which will hold it latched on for good, and that will make it jump straight to default mode. But although it shows here, it'll jump straight to default mode. Remember, we put in a 1 second transition delay in that flight mode. Bear in mind also, if you've put other flight modes above that flight mode and then come down to it, so suppose you've put in a 3D flight mode above it and whatever other flight modes, you are going to get that slowed transition as you come back into the default flight mode. But you can run that default flight mode down to say half a second or a third of a second. It's still going to be a lot nicer for the servos and the linkages than the immediate slam of going from 100 to 0 in an instant. Okay, so soft start mode. I'll now switch on the receiver. Okay, get that into view. Okay, and watch it change. There we go. And that's it. A pseudo soft start programmed from your radio. Have fun with that, folks.